That's actually why I'm coming from Israel, so it's really hot there. So
oh yeah, in tropical climates you really have
so
to.
we always so coming from Israel, so I just buy the cheapest flour here. So probably it's not the best idea because I bake a lot. So
the trouble is you may not know what flour that
exactly,
you're using, but I just have to tell you that my husband's been complaining lately that his drawer in the freezer for flour, where I put all the bread that's only for him and not for my baking experiments and stuff, that is being invaded by bags of flour. You know, I mean, I need a walk-in freezer. It takes up a lot of room. So what kind of flour do I recommend?
Yeah.
Well, everybody on the blog, at first for cakes. In the new book, I'm using the gold medal bleached all-purpose flour almost across the board, except for Wonder, which I use for the sponge cakes. And there are a couple of new cakes I've developed where I do a combination of cake flour and all-purpose. But it has become the minority for two reasons. It started off that cake flour is becoming harder and harder to find in the first place. And then I've been gravitating more toward cakes made with oil. Initially I didn't like them because I love the flavor of butter, but since I like buttercream less than I used to, and I love whipped cream and lighter things, a butter cake is horrible when it's been refrigerated, and you have to refrigerate it if it doesn't have, if you have whipped cream on it, you can only leave it out for a few hours. So I found that certain cakes, like carrot cake and even chocolate cake, can be absolutely wonderful. And you'll have to find out the rest in the fall of '09, but that does better with an all-purpose bleached flour. Yes, Courtney?
You don't have to answer this. But
I may not be able to.
No, 3 days after you either use flour, 3 days after you grind it, or wait 3 weeks is an enzymatic activity. But what happens in that period between the 3 days and 3 weeks?
Well, the enzymes start kicking in, apparently due to the oxygenation. And then when you bake with it, and don't think I didn't ask the flour miller that very same question, so I'll answer it basically the way he said, is that you will not get the full height of the bread, and there'll be a kind of stickiness. You know, like when you make a bread using too much rye flour, too high a percentage, the pentasins in the rye flour make it really sticky unless it's really acidic, unless you use a sourdough starter, or you introduce another type of acidity. You can only use a limited amount. And apparently the enzymes behave in whole wheat in a similar way, where it destroys the structure and doesn't give you as good a structure. But after 3 weeks, apparently the activity slows down or stops completely, and then you're okay for a little longer before the oxygen makes it rancid and less desirable in flavor. So that's basically it.
A couple more questions, Rose.
Yeah?
Go ahead.
What do you use the double O flour?
I don't. But
What's it designed
double O
for?
flour for pizza or for pasta. But I have to tell you about durum. I never even mentioned what I love durum for. And that's aside from pasta, because I do make my own pasta. But I also add it to bread in certain proportions, because if you're ever into Sicily, almost all their bread has it in it, and that's why it's so golden. It has more flavor than most other flours. And so you have to be sure to use the right kind of durum. There's durum semolina and there's durum flour. They're both from the same source, but the flour is fine and powdery, and the semolina is really coarse, so it won't give you the same texture either in the pasta or in the bread. And it's sometimes a little bit hard to find, but keep it in the freezer, and I'm really down to very little because I just made lasagna for the first time, making all the noodles from scratch, and that was a big challenge, just getting them into a pan and getting them out in 1 minute when you have to boil them. I may not be doing that again, but I like durum, a mixture of durum and all-purpose unbleached for the stretchiness when I'm doing my homemade pasta. So, yes?
Have you tried Queen Guinevere cake flour?
It's a slightly higher percentage than cake flour, than the other cake flours on the market, but I think it would be comparable. You know, I have to tell you, the reason it came into being is that King Arthur was categorically against anything that was unbleached. I mean, that was bleached. They wanted only unbleached flour because their primary orientation was bread. And then when the Cake Bible came out, everybody who was devoted to King Arthur said, but we can't use your flour because Rose says it has to be bleached. So that's how Queen Guinevere came into
So
it.
Queen Guinevere is bleached then?
Yeah, it's bleached, and it's a 0.5% higher than Swanstown or soft to silk. And even though, it's interesting, because even though the Wonder is slightly higher percentage, because of the way in which it's treated, it's more tender. Well, I'm not going to say anything more because I'll give away the blind tasting. Any more questions before I start the one,
Yeah. You were saying that if you're melting the butter, it doesn't really matter as much, right?
Yeah, in the genoise, for example, where you melt the butter, it doesn't matter if the flour is bleached or unbleached, although bleached flour there too will give you a finer, nicer texture, and I even use part
If
cornstarch.
you're using oil,
Oil too. Well, you know, that's a really good question. Can you
because
use...
creaming is one thing, but if you're using the oil, it's a suspension again. I mean, with the egg in there.
You know, my oil cake's woody, we're gonna have to try. We didn't try that, did we? The oil cake using unbleached flour. But the thing is that it's a higher protein. So you'd have to cut it.
I've used King Arthur unbleached in oil cakes, and I've never had them fill.
Oh, it wouldn't
100%.
fall. No, it wouldn't fall, but it will be not as tender. And we got just the right tenderness that we were after by using the bleached. So there'd be no reason to use unbleached unless you have some sort of philosophical.
And then, of course, your protein count in King Arthur is much higher than the gold medal.
That's right. King Arthur's all-purpose is higher. I had all these percentages down pat in my brain, but I had to actually list them because
I think it's like
it's
2
hard to
points higher
remember.
than gold medal.
The all-purpose, yes, but it's not much higher than the Harvest King. I think it's either a half a percentage or no
It's
more
like
than a
14.
percentage. No,
No?
that's their bread flour.
The red flour.
They're,
It's
I don't
12
think I have it
then,
even
it's like
listed.
12?
I think it's, yeah, I think it's 12 for the
All-purpose.
all-purpose. Because Harvest King is 11.7. Yeah, so it's just fractionally higher. But as I said, those fractions make a difference. But I would rather use, if I were going to use their flour, I'd rather use their all-purpose than the bread for almost every single bread except a bagel, where there you really want high gluten. And by the way, if you buy Vital Wheat gluten, that keeps 18 months. Not only did they tell me that, but I tried it out in the refrigerator, and it does begin to weaken. But it's great because if you can't have access easily, or if you want to add it to a cake, to a bread recipe that you have where you're putting in some grains and seeds, you know that it's going to give it the strength to hold them up.
Any other questions? Should we get to
Yes.
What's the optimum protein percentage for cakes? Seems to be really,
It depends on the cake.
depends on the cake.
So it's between 8 and 11, which is huge. Let's see, didn't I say it was 11? Yeah, 11 protein for bleached all-purpose flour. And sometimes a blend and sometimes the 9%, so you really can't, you know, in fact, when people tell me from other countries that they can only get such and such a protein, I have to start telling them what they can do to weaken it. Because you can't, if you can't get a weaker protein, you have to weaken some other aspect of the cake, which generally means using more leavening. Because the leavening not only puts air into it and opens up the cell structure, it also disrupts it. And so it causes it to be more level. So if you have a cake that comes out domed, either your flour is too strong, you have too little leavening, or too little fat, or not enough sugar, because sugar also weakens. So those are all the things you're playing with. You can take your choice which one you want to decrease or increase, but don't do all of them at once. That's where when I didn't used to be as much of somewhat of a scientist as I am now, I would think, oh, these 3 things all might work, let me try them all. And my husband would say, only one variable at a time. I learned that. I'm going to start the cake, unless somebody has any more questions. It's a little bit hard to talk out of the corner of my mouth. But of course you can ask questions afterwards, and just as soon as I make the cake, we'll pass out the cake so you can taste them and give your opinions before I tell you what is the differences. Somebody did that once and almost knocked out my front tooth. All right. I was going down with the mic, up with the mic, and then I went down, and she went up. My mother wasn't happy about that. She was annoyed because my mother was a dentist.